Hi vinyl community, Elliot here, Lazy Dogs Records, and it's a lazy Sunday afternoon, and I thought I would do a few of the contests that have been posted in the last few days. Now Mike over at Jam on Vinyl has one that I wanted to enter. He entered my contest, and I appreciate that, so I certainly want to support his channel as well. He's up to over 270 subscribers now, and to commemorate that, Mike is a history teacher. I'm a retired history teacher, so we've got a lot in common. We both love vinyl records as well. So I thought I would enter his Jam on History competition, and he asked for 5 albums that in some way connect history or tell a story or commemorate events, things such as that. So I will start off. Now, I taught North Carolina and U.S. history, a combined course, a survey of the state of our state history. You can't really tell the history of North Carolina without telling the history of the United States. So I tried to combine as much local material as I could. Now, of course, the great Dawg Watson, flat picking guitar extraordinaire. He came up with this album, and it's on Vanguard, and it's simply Dawg Watson. 63, I believe, is when he released this album, and it includes a couple of murder ballads. "Oh Me Wise," which has been done many times, and another song that the Kingston Trio, during the folk boom in the early 60s, late 50s, the Kingston Trio recorded Tom Dooley, and Dawg Watson does Tom Dooley here. Interestingly enough, Dawg has a lot more connections to all of that than the Kingston Trio does. He grew up and lived all his life in Deep Gap, North Carolina, in the Appalachian Mountains, and Tom Dooley was actually Tom Dula, D-U-L-A, and his family knew that family and knew that story. When I lived up there, I had a friend whose girlfriend was connected to Laura Foster and Ann Meldon. Laura Foster was the girl murdered, and Ann Melton is possibly the one that did the murdering, either with Tom Dula or on her own, and Tom Dula did it, and together they covered it up. Anyway, it's a great song. It is a true song to the extent that music can tell a true story. But what is historically significant about it, it ties in the American Civil War. He was a young veteran, only 21 or 22 years old when he came back from the war, and the murder happened a couple of soon after the war ended. During the Reconstruction era, he went on trial twice, Tom Dula did, and was eventually convicted and hanged for the crime of murdering Laura Foster. And he was defended by Civil War period Governor Zebulon Vance, who would later be one of the prominent U.S. senators from North Carolina, a very colorful character in his own right. So it tells a lot of the story of kind of what life was like during the years following the American Civil War, during Reconstruction. It shows how before we had television and radio, we had newspapers, and we had telling the stories of events through music. Next one I have is part of a series. This is volume 1 from Atlantic Records, Atlantic Rhythm and Blues, 1941 to 1974. Volume 1 goes from 1940. I said 40. I meant to say 47. 1947 to 1952. And the history of Atlantic Records is very very important. Their recordings included everything from blues guitarists to big band jump music, things like that, swing, and the singing groups like the Clovers. A lot of Clovers on this one. Ruth Brown's on here. Ray Charles is the last number. Professor Longhair coming up from New Orleans does a couple of tunes here. Styx McGee doing Drink Wine, and just some interesting stuff. Really, this is kind of the story of the black migration from the South during and after the war to various areas of the North. Of course, the Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas folks moved from Memphis to up to Memphis, and then up from Memphis to places like Chicago, Gary, Indiana, places like that. On the southeastern coast, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, African Americans tended to migrate up the north from there on the eastern seaboard to Washington, D.C., Baltimore, up into New York, New Jersey, places like that. And this is what many of these artists were first, second generation migrating to the Northeast. So it kind of tells the story of black migration out of the South during that era. This is a really great, my third is Woody Guthrie, and these are Library of Congress recordings, 3 hours of songs and conversation recorded by the great Alan Lomax. And you can really learn the story of the Great Depression through the music of Woody Guthrie and the telling of the stories. Dust Pneumonia Blues is on here, Dust Bowl Refugees. There's probably 20 songs on here. Boll Weevil Song, Talking Dust Bowl Blues, Do Re Mi, Pretty Boy Floyd, Walking Down the Railroad Line. And of course, during the Great Depression, so many people were uprooted. The Okies, which was a derogatory term for folks from Oklahoma and Kansas, Texas, that area that migrated to California hoping to find work there, the promised land in essence there. And of course they didn't find the promised land. In here it says Woody talks about his family, early life, Dust Bowl of April 14th, 1935, migration from the Dust Bowl, hard times, the handbill situation, labor contractors for the migrant field workers, living conditions in California, the Dust Bowl refugees. Oh, this is his great historical document right here. Great Woody Guthrie. And in the 1940s, Bill Monroe is the only person to invent an entire genre of music. And over about a 10-year period after he left, he and his brother broke up, the Monroe Brothers duet group. He worked on creating a band sound that all his own, which became bluegrass. And it really came together when he employed a young banjo player from Shelby, near Shelby, North Carolina, named Earl Scruggs, who played an innovative style of banjo, pushing it into a hyperdrive and into a new expanded boundaries. And Lester Flatt, great singer and rhythm guitar player, when those two were added to the band, it made a huge difference. It basically created that final version of what Bill was looking for, which became bluegrass. Of course, Bill got real mad when Lester and Earl left. and started their own band. And when the Stanley Brothers started playing his style, what he thought was his music, he really felt they were stealing from him, ripping him off. But really what they were doing was expanding it from one band sound to create a whole genre of music, bluegrass. So that's a very historically important album there. And Rhiannon Giddens, let's leave here. Rhiannon Giddens, very, very important artist today, making great music. This is Freedom Highway from her. Of course, she was in the Carolina Chocolate Drops, which opened up a whole new world to everybody in revealing the huge contributions that African Americans made into the string band music, which a lot of people had assumed was simply a white musical style. It certainly wasn't. But after she left Carolina Chocolate Drops, she began working with like T-Bone Burnett and other artists. That she had one solo album before this one, and then this album in 2017. And she is a student of history, and she is trying to tell the story of maybe people who were forgotten, what it was like, for instance, to be a slave in the antebellum South. She has one song she co-wrote here, At the Purchaser's Option, which is she took from seeing a handbill advertising slaves for sale, and there was a slave woman for sale, and it casually mentions at the bottom of the bill that she had a baby, and if whoever purchased in auction this slave, it was at their option to take the baby as well, or could leave the baby. Now think about the inhumanity of that. So that's a great song. Let's see, Birmingham Sunday, telling the story of the little girls murdered by the Klan in Birmingham, which was written by Richard Farina. And Better Get It Right the First Time, she co-wrote with Dirk Powell and Justin Harrington, who is her nephew, I believe, which is telling, the plight of the young African American men, that the relationship with police. And better get it right the first time. You can be totally innocent, but sometimes assumptions can be made, and whereas if you hadn't been a young African American male, you would have been more likely not to have drastic action taken towards you. Get it right the first time, you might get shot. Also on here, Following the North Star, which obviously get the connection there. And she does Pop Staples' great civil rights movement song, Freedom Highway. Very important artist, Rhiannon Giddens. Highly recommend her. Voice, unbelievable voice. You love it. If you're not familiar with her, I highly recommend you do. And he also asked for a favorite mono album. I looked through my collection. I said, oh, okay, I got it. I always treasure things that from my past. And I've mentioned before my mother's albums. When I did my introduction video, I showed some of her albums. One of them I didn't show, though, was this one. This is on Warner Brothers. It's Peter, Paul, and Mary. And Mom had some of the folk boom artists, especially Peter, Paul, and Mary. And this, I don't know, this is probably from 1962. I see it on here. And this has got some classic songs like 500 Miles, This Train, If I Had My Way, I'd Tear This Building Down. That, I believe Irvin Gary Davis did that one too. And probably one I remember most from my childhood was If I Had a Hammer. Okay. And Where Have All the Flowers Gone is also on this album. So this is a mono record that is very important, and it's also historically significant in that the folk musicians were advocates, social advocates, and as you can see there. Okay, so Mike, I hope I hope you have good success with jamming on history, and I bet you'll be up to 300 or more subscribers in no time. I appreciate it, and I'll remind everybody I've got a contest up too. If I'm hitting 130 plus is my contest. I'll try to link it here. Enter that one too. See this one. Enter Mike's contest. Great one. And enter mine as well if you get a chance. And I'll remind everybody, be kind to your neighbor. And everybody is your neighbor.